Desborough gave Icke another view that became very important to Icke's teaching. He gave him his current view on Jesus. Most of you might not know, but Icke's view about Jesus changes dramatically from book to book. For instance, the early Icke is very confident that Jesus existed, only that the Bible didn't include parts of his story that it should have.
There is a thin line of truth in the Bible, certainly. And many of the things that the being Jesus, who certainly did exist and certainly did die in that way, says are accurate reflections of what he said, but they are taken out of context and misinterpreted.
One interesting way to demonstrate that his views changed dramatically about this from book to book is by first quoting this passage from Truth Vibrations. He says, quote, "My own feeling and what I have channeled and seen leads me to believe that Jesus survived the crucifixion. I had a very strong vision of Jesus on the cross. During that vision, I was with Jesus, experiencing what he felt. He experienced great pain in his hands and wrists, and he was utterly exhausted. I then saw a pole being raised with a cloth, which was offered to his mouth. From this he took a drink. Soon after this he appeared to lose consciousness. When he awoke, he was lying with people all around him, attending to his wounds. They were all in white, I remember. It was clear that Jesus was in a state of shock. He whispered, 'I live, I live,' as though he had expected to leave the physical body. I had other visions and channeling, which together gave me this overall picture of what actually happened 2,000 years ago." Now listen to his version of the crucifixion in his next book, Love Changes Everything. When the channeling, crucifixion, had finished, one of the followers asked if Jesus could be taken down, and his request was granted. He was still alive at this point, but the swift movement of the sword removed him from the physical level. Only Jesus knew for certain he would die. So, in this version, Jesus did die, which is obviously a massive contradiction from the previous book with no explanation of the discrepancy. Keep in mind, in that book, Jesus personally talks to David on a regular basis. For instance, Jesus is quoted as saying things like, quote, "I was so determined, David, so determined to ensure that the truth could not disappear because one man was nailed to some wood, and I knew the effect it would have on Lucifer Satan if the energies were powerful enough." Icke always tries to downplay his famous claim to be the Son of God. He always said he was simply claiming to be a Son of God, not the Son of God. But the problem is that he really did claim that he personally was the one spoken of in the Bible that was going to return. He claims in this clip to be the second coming of Christ.
Do you think if Jesus were alive today, and you'd been alive then, he would be writing books and doing promo tours and appearing on television programs and so forth? Would he be promoting it in the same way that you are now?
Tell you the funny thing, Nicky, you know, the Bible actually predicts the coming of the Son of Man, the coming of the Son of God, at this time of great change.
Oh, right now?
Yeah. Well, at this time of great change.
The Bible predicts you in a way?
Yeah, exactly. It calls the being the Son of Man.
Where is that? So people can...
That is in the book of Revelations towards the end.
Right.
And it's also earlier on in some of the Gospels too. What do they expect this Son of Man to look like? Do they expect him to wear a beard and a white robe?
Well, they don't expect him to be a Hereford United goalkeeper.
Correct. But did they expect, the people 2,000 years ago didn't expect their Son of God or whatever to be a carpenter's son, and he got the same reaction. You see, what it is, it's about incarnating into a body that relates to the world as it is at the time. That's why Jesus was a carpenter's son and worked in Palestine. Why in this life have I...
Because you're a broadcaster.
Exactly. Why was I taken into the communications
You were
industry?
taught self-discipline in sport.
Correct.
I know that.
This is how it's done.
Yeah.
And so I'm comfortable talking to you, and I'm comfortable on television, I'm comfortable in broadcasting, which is a great help to get over the truth, as the world is at the moment, where the media is the vehicle to do it. You are given the gifts, and we're all given the gifts, that we need in particular lifetimes, and at this time, in this lifetime, I need certain abilities to be comfortable on the media and know the media, and that's what's been given to me.
And as most of you know, Icke's view on Jesus changes dramatically from here. He would later add elements from various books that he read, and by the time he gets to The Biggest Secret, he exchanged all previous views for Brian Desborough's view. Have you ever heard of Icke talk about Tammuz and Nimrod and Queen Semiramis? I'm pretty sure you have. It's one of the most common parts of Icke's presentations, and he rarely misses an opportunity to launch into his spiel.
In Babylon, they had a trinity of Queen Semiramis, also known as Ishtar or Istar, Nimrod, the sun god, she was the moon goddess, and Tammuz, who was the virgin-born son of Nimrod and Semiramis.
He took this view word for word from Brian Desborough, and although he doesn't credit Desborough for it, it's clear that he did. For instance, there is no mention of Tammuz or Semiramis before this book, and it's obvious that he is using the same wording from Desborough's article called The Great Pyramid Mystery, Tomb, Occult Initiation Center, or What? For instance, Icke writes, Tammuz, who is said to have been crucified with a lamb at his feet and placed in a cave when a rock was rolled away from the cave's entrance 3 days later. Now compare that with what Desborough writes. Tammuz, who, according to the writer Langton Tius, was said to have been crucified with a lamb at his feet and placed in a cave when a rock was rolled away from the cave's entrance 3 days later. The only difference is that Icke takes out the reference to Langton Tius. One reason he probably did this is because Langton Tius was a person who was widely known for taking Christianity and trying to explain it using pagan symbology to be more acceptable to the pagans. So it's not shocking if we were to find this information, but as we will see, even given this, the claim is still not true, and that's probably why Icke drops the reference altogether. In any case, the point is that Icke took the reference, and it's clear that Icke had access to this particular article, because in other places in his book, The Biggest Secret, when Icke cites Desborough, he cites this very same article. The footnote reads, Brian Desborough, The Great Pyramid Mystery, Tomb, Occult Initiation Center, or What? A document supplied to the author and also published in the California Sun newspaper, Los Angeles. The biggest problem here is not who he got the information from, but how terrible the information is. No scholar would ever write that a rock was rolled away from Tammuz's tomb after 3 days. This is a flat-out untruth with no apologies. Even Acharya S., who Desborough is misquoting right here, disagrees with this idea, and that's saying something if you know who she is. Icke traded in his earlier view of Jesus for this most easily disproved one. I will call it the zeitgeist version of Jesus. This is the one where he did not exist in history, but was an amalgamation of ancient pagan gods. This is the one that I believed for a long time, thanks to David Icke. But I started doing some investigation on my own, and I realized that something was really wrong with this view. Although it sounded plausible and even scientific, I couldn't confirm any of it with the actual writings about these gods from the original sources. And all the people that claimed that these things could be found in the original sources were Freemasons or Luciferians. For instance, Icke tells us in The Biggest Secret that Horus was the Good Shepherd, that Horus was the Lamb. Horus was baptized at age 30, he was the child of a virgin, his birth was marked by a star, he had 12 followers, Horus was the morning star, Horus was the cursed, Horus was tempted on a mountain by Set, and that he was a child teacher in a temple. The problem is that none of this is true. If you read every single thing you can find that the Egyptians wrote about Horus, you won't find any of this stuff. It's a flat-out lie. And guess who Icke cites for his claims like this? Albert Churchward, a high-level Freemason. And not only that, but someone who lacks any expertise in this field. I think one reviewer of his book on Amazon said it best about Albert Churchward in regard to his scholarship, quote, "This book is not recommended for those expecting a scientific approach. The absence of any description of the author's academic background explains it all." I've had a website up called ZeitgeistChallenge.com since the film Zeitgeist came out, and it offers $1,000 cash to anyone who can simply show where in the ancient text these things can be found. I've yet to have one serious submission to this challenge since the website was put up. I have had a lot of people confident that they could answer the challenge until they started to look for the actual writings themselves, which is why I put the site up in the first place, to get people to come to the same conclusions that I did on my own. This is a Freemasonic lie. Yes, I know that the movie gives a long list of their sources, but if you inspect those sources, you will find that they do not even attempt to cite actual original texts, but instead cite recent authors who themselves do not cite sources. If this idea that I'm suggesting makes you mad and you think that I'm kidding, please watch the films Zeitgeist Refuted, Final Cut, or Zeitgeist Part 1 Exposed, the film. In the footnotes you'll find both of them, and they're both by two separate filmmakers, and they do a great job of showing how easily this idea is refuted. In fact, of all the various versions of Jesus that Icke has had, this current view is the most easily refuted. Now let's go back to Desborough and Icke's view about all the Babylonian symbolism in Christianity. But first let me explain something that will really help you understand what we're about to discuss. Christianity was around for at least 300 years before the Vatican existed. Secular history records a massive slaughter that literally lasted the entire early history of Christianity. Almost every emperor of Rome, starting with Nero, continued the relentless genocide of Christians. They fed them to the lions in arenas, and they burnt them alive for fun. This is what being a Christian was for the first 300 years of their history. Deciding to be a Christian was basically deciding to be tortured and killed publicly. It wasn't a decision that people made lightly. These people's beliefs were nothing like the Babylonian religion of Rome. This is one reason why Rome hated them so much. A good example of this is the Emperor Diocletian, who believed he had eliminated all the Christians. He erected monuments to himself that boasted of this supposed accomplishment. It was engraved, Diocletian, Jovian, Maximin, Herculeus, Caesarus, Augusti, for having everywhere abolished the superstition of Christ, for having extended the worship of the gods. It was only after one of the emperors, Constantine, was said to convert to Christianity, and the jury is still out as to whether that actually happened or not, but one thing is certain: after that time the government decided to stop fighting Christianity, and instead it seeks to totally control it. It unwisely declared Christianity the official religion of Rome, which, as you can imagine, was a shock to all the pagan citizens of Rome. This is when you start to see all the pagan symbolism start to creep into Christianity. It was added, at least in part, to appease the pagans and incorporate their symbolism into a religion that they had all tried to destroy for the last 300 years. And this is the key to understanding this. The Bible itself, the writings that the Christians were reading during their times of persecution, doesn't support any of these Illuminati symbols or ideas. This is why the Vatican made reading the Bible illegal in the 1200s. The real Christians were literally burned alive with their illegal copies of the Bible chained around their necks. Even to this day, the Catholics do not recommend reading the Bible themselves. They say it's better left to the priests to interpret for them. This is also why it was not allowed to be translated into any language but Latin for 1,000 years. The obvious reason is that if the people were allowed to read the Bible, they would know that the empire was telling them to do and believe things that were not in the Bible. Take the second commandment, for instance.
Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them.
Now this should help you see what's going on when David shows this picture of Mary and the Queen of Heaven. Yeah, sure, there's an ancient goddess called the Queen of Heaven, and the Roman Catholics do call Mary the Queen of Heaven. But has anyone ever read to you what the Bible says about this Queen of Heaven? In the book of Judges, 1 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, and Jeremiah, it talks about this pagan sacrifice and mentions specifically the pagan goddess called the Queen of Heaven several times. And God declares, because of their worship of this pagan goddess called the Queen of Heaven, that he would withdraw his protection from them and judge them. The fact that the Roman government took the story of Mary and inserted their favorite goddess, the same one that the Bible actually warns us about, does not mean that Christianity was based on the Queen of Heaven. It just means that the government was tricking people into doing what they wanted them to do. And as generations went by, with people no longer reading the Bible anymore, it got easier and easier to trick people in regard to what was and what wasn't actually in the Bible.
So this is why there is the Babylonian depiction of Semiramis and Tammuz, and this is a Christian church. Same again. This is a picture I took last Christmas in Rome when I was there for a television program, and that appears to be Jesus and Mary. Actually, it's Semiramis and Tammuz.
I don't even think that I understood this one when I did believe that Icke was genuine. Has anyone ever stopped to consider that mothers with children might be the most common motif in art in the history of the world? I mean, mothers have always had children since the dawn of time, right? Even before there were fruit bowls to paint, there were no shortage of mothers with children. I think it's kind of funny when I hear people showing a picture of a mother and a child statue as if they're making a deep connection to Christianity. If statues of mothers with children is a specific thing, only to be compared with Mary and Jesus, then I have a lot more similarities with Mary and Jesus that I would like to add to the list, from every culture and every time period. Again, you won't find any descriptions of Mary holding Jesus at all in the Bible. It's not some special idea in the Bible at all. this is art commissioned by the Roman government, and it has nothing to do with Christianity. Early Christians did not make images of Jesus because of what they thought was obedience to the second commandment about making idols. This artwork is only something you see after Rome starts calling the shots and telling everyone this is what Christianity is now. And the sad thing is, nowadays we believe them. This also explains this idea of halos. So much is made about these halos in theosophy and in the occult, but there's nothing about halos in the Bible. Early Christians wouldn't even make paintings of Jesus in the first place, as we mentioned. The halos on Jesus or other people that Rome made the artists paint is only evidence that as pagans, the Roman/Babylonians were trying to appeal to the pagans who were used to seeing their gods like this. The whole idea is foreign to real Christianity and foreign to the Bible. Just another case of Icke telling you to believe that the Illuminati version of Christianity is the real version. But my favorite one that Icke uses is this one.
This is another depiction of Nimrod in the ancient world. He was also the fish god. Again, Jesus, the fish. He had the fish head hat. This is a depiction, actual depiction from Babylon, and that's why we have the mitre in the Pope.
The key to this one is the connection that Icke makes to Jesus and fish. Did you catch it?
Again, Jesus, the fish.
Jesus is in no way associated with fish, except in the occult world, where Blavatsky stated this because she wanted to connect Jesus to the age of Pisces, so that she could be done with him in her new age. When Jordan Maxwell does this, he always will say, Jesus the Fisher King, which is not a title for Jesus at all. Jesus wasn't a fisher king or a fisherman. Jesus was a carpenter. This is a little mind trick that Maxwell plays to build up the case that Jesus was associated with Pisces. There are about 3 things that people say to equate Jesus with fish so they can either make this Dagon hat connection or the Pisces connection. Let's look at them really quick so we can see why Icke's, quote, Jesus the fish thing is so wrong. A few of Jesus' disciples were fishermen. Now does that make Jesus a fish? He did feed many people one time with 2 fish. And this is why people equate him with the astrological sign of Pisces, which is represented by 2 fish. But when people make this claim, they never mention that only a few days later, he did the same thing with more than 2 fish and a different number of loaves. Why wouldn't they tell you about that instance a few pages later? Because it ruins the whole Pisces thing. The fact is that Jesus did all kinds of miracles. We don't associate Jesus with ears, even though he was said to heal a man's ear once. And the final thing that people do is point to the Jesus fish on cars. This symbol was representative of an acrostic in the Greek language that early Christians used to use as a sign to see if certain places were safe for them during the persecutions. It meant Jesus, anointed, God, Son, and Savior, and it doesn't make Jesus a fish. Before moving on to another man who Icke bases his beliefs on, I will conclude that the reason that the emperors of Rome and later the Roman Catholic Church tried to keep the Bible from people is that contrary to what we were taught in the so-called truth movement, the Bible is incredibly anti-Illuminati. Not only does God reveal to people like Ezekiel that the elites of his day, the Illuminati if you will, were worshiping the sun behind closed doors, and later he showed him that the secret worship of Tammuz was going on too. It is filled with discussions and promises to judge this so-called secret power of lawlessness, which we might call the Illuminati. See my video, Was the Bible Written or Changed by the Illuminati, for more on this. Truth Vibrations. He says, quote, my own feeling and what I have channeled and seen leads me to believe that Jesus survived the crucifixion. I had a very strong vision of Jesus on the cross. During that vision, I was with Jesus, experiencing what he felt. He experienced great pain in his hands and wrists, and he was utterly exhausted. I then saw a pole, other visions, and channeling, which together gave me this overall picture of what actually happened 2,000 years ago. Now listen to his version of the crucifixion in his next book, Love Changes Everything. When the channeling, crucifixion, had finished, one of the followers asked if Jesus could be taken down, and his request was granted. He was still alive at this point, being raised with a cloth, which was offered to his mouth. From this he took a drink. Soon after this he appeared to lose consciousness. When he awoke, he was lying with people all around him, attending to his wounds. They were all in white, I remember. It was clear that Jesus was in a state of shock. He whispered, I live, as though he had expected to leave the physical body. Desborough gave Icke another view that became very important to Icke's teaching. He gave him his current view on Jesus. Most of you might not know, but Icke's view about Jesus changes dramatically from book to book. For instance, the early Icke is very confident that Jesus existed, only that the Bible didn't include parts of his story that it should have.
There is a thin line of truth in the Bible, certainly. And many of the things that the being Jesus, who certainly did exist and certainly did die in that way, says are accurate reflections of what he said, but they are taken out of context and misinterpreted.
One interesting way to demonstrate that his views changed dramatically about this from book to book is by first quoting this passage from